If you happen to read my article in the April edition of The Echo, you know that I wrote about the 2018 NCAA men's basketball tournament. More specifically, I referenced a game between the University of Virginia and the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, or UMBC for short. The reason this game was noteworthy was because Virginia was the #1 seed in their bracket, and UMBC was the number 16 seed in their bracket. And in the history of the NCAA men's basketball tournament, 135 times a #1 seed played a number 16 seed, and 135 times the #1 seed was victorious. But on March 16, 2018, that changed as UMBC defeated Virginia 74-54 in what may have been the greatest upset in college basketball history. And while it was certainly easy to be excited for the players from UMBC, it was also easy to feel badly for the players from Virginia. This was an historic loss. This was an embarrassing loss. This was a loss that they would have to live with for the rest of their lives. How would they ever bounce back from such an epic failure? As the disciples huddled together in that upper room on that first Easter Sunday evening, they knew what it felt like to be embarrassed by their actions. They had experienced a disappointment that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They had failed Jesus, and it was truly an epic failure. Just 3 days earlier, Jesus had made some very disturbing predictions. He told them that he would be betrayed into the hands of sinners. And subsequently, the disciples were going to desert him in that time of need. And Peter would go even further by denying 3 times that he even knew Jesus. Not surprisingly, the disciples responded strongly to this news. Peter said to Jesus, "Even though I must die with you, I will not deny you." And so said all the disciples. But as we know, what Jesus said came to pass. Judas led the chief priests into the Garden of Gethsemane, where they arrested Jesus. The disciples saw the angry mob carrying clubs and swords, and they quickly fled the scene. And Peter, who was sitting in the courtyard of the high priest, was confronted 3 times about being one of Jesus' followers. And 3 times he unequivocally denied ever knowing him. Just a few hours earlier, the disciples confidently boasted that they would stick with Jesus, even die with him. But now, those words proved to be empty promises. They had failed themselves, and even worse, they had failed Jesus. How would they ever bounce back from that? for the University of Virginia men's basketball team, their opportunity to bounce back from their epic failure took 12 months. They had another successful season. And as a result, they gained the #1 seed in the 2019 NCAA basketball tournament, just as they had the prior year. This meant that they would play yet again a #16 seed in the first round. This time, their opponent was Gardner-Webb. And in what appeared to be a replay of the year before, Virginia trailed by as many as 12 points in the first half. But this time, they rallied to win comfortably in the end. Having successfully put last year's failure behind them, Virginia went on to win their next 5 games. And with that, they became national champions. It was truly a wonderful redemption story. For the disciples of Jesus, their opportunity to bounce back from their epic failure took only a few days. Today's gospel lesson informs us that it was evening of that first Easter, and things were still very confusing for the disciples. They were still in shock over Jesus' death. But now, they had heard a rumor from some women who had gone to the tomb and found that it was empty, and who told them that they had seen the risen Lord. Even if it were somehow true that Jesus was alive, the disciples likely feared how Jesus would react toward them. After all, they had failed him when he needed them the most. But as John informs us, they would not have to wait for very long. Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Interestingly, when Jesus came into their midst, knowing that they were afraid of the Jews, knowing also that they may have been afraid of him, the very first word he shares with them is peace. And this is the very same word that Jesus shares in the 14th chapter of John, where he tells the disciples, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid." While their hearts were indeed troubled at that moment, Jesus assures them that they can have peace. A peace to calm their hearts. A peace that comes from God. And after offering them this peace a second time, Jesus comes to them and says something that seems so very astounding. He tells the disciples, "As the Father has sent me, so I send you." When he said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit." Jesus doesn't chasten his disciples for their desertion. He offers them his peace. Jesus doesn't let them dwell on their past unfaithfulness. He equips them with his Spirit and sends them out. This is a true redemption story. However, it is important for us to remember that the disciples did not redeem themselves. They were redeemed by Jesus. And as we learn from reading the book of Acts, empowered by the Holy Spirit, the disciples proved faithful in sharing the good news. Lest we miss the point, this morning's gospel lesson applies directly to each of our lives. There are times when we have failed Jesus. Times when we remain silent, when we should have spoken up. Times when we failed to act, when we should have responded. Times when we were confident in our faithfulness, only to fall short. Thankfully, our failures are not written in the scriptures for everyone to read. But nonetheless, we can fully relate to the disciples. But just like the disciples, Jesus comes to us and shares the very same words. Peace be with you. Peace. Don't dwell on your past failures. I don't. Peace. Don't be afraid that I am angry with you. I'm not. Peace. Don't be troubled that I won't give you another chance. I will. And just like with the disciples, Jesus comes into our midst and says these words, "As the Father has sent me, so I send you." And so we are sent out into the world not because we are perfect, not because we are never going to fail again. No, we are sent into the world for one important reason. Because Jesus sends us. And clearly Jesus believes in second chances. And he empowers us through his Spirit to spread his good news. May we learn from the Virginia men's basketball team. And may we learn from those 11 disciples. Failure can be painful, but failure is not fatal, and it is not final. Instead, for those of us who are in Jesus Christ, we know that we have another chance. And we know the end of the story. For us, we know that it is won.